Everyone, and welcome back to this week's video. And in this week's video, we're going to do, of course, Jeremiah 16th chapter. As of course last week, we went into very much detail about the Jeremiah 15th chapter, where God says, judgment is to come. So, thanking the Lord through our Savior Jesus Christ, let us begin on the reflection of Jeremiah 16th chapter in this week's chapter. In this week's video, I should say. As in this video, we're going to be seeing how God speaks directly to his prophet in being Jeremiah, we can see. As he's talking to Jeremiah in this chapter, not just with his words, but through his life, we can see. God uses Jeremiah's life, we can see, as a representation of what is to come, we can see. As overall, this chapter is filled with warning, sorrow, but of course, that glimpse of hope, because God, for us, is his people, and the people he always wants to be providing his unconditional love, no matter the consequence that is in store, we can see. So let us begin. So, we can see in the start of this Jeremiah 16th chapter, God begins by giving Jeremiah commands, a very peculiar command, we can see, where he says to not marry or have children, we can see. As we can see, this would be very much of a predicament for many people back then and including now, if God suddenly said to do this action, we can see. As we can see, many people would see this as a sign to ask why, because God says there's a great judgment coming, and Jeremiah asks this question, why? And God responds by saying there is this judgment coming. And we can see it's so severe that families during this time will only bring pain, we can see, to overall everyone in that family living. We can see this judgment is going to be that severe that families will suffer, and God is saying to escape from this suffering you must be completely bland for now and not embellish in that joy of having a family, we can see. And that is why God is telling Jeremiah here not to marry, we can see. And we can see in this predicament, we can see Jeremiah clearly agrees, we can see, as God says alongside this punishment to Jeremiah that the next generation will face death, disease and destruction. And in other words, we can see Jeremiah's own life becomes a living message to the people, and this was the clear idea God wanted to come across to the people. We can see that Jeremiah, because of all your continuous rebellions, we can see Jeremiah, it will now become the message to the people, as his own life is representing the message of the people, we can see, as a symbol of what is to come for the people of this rebellious nation, we can see. And then we can see God says another key idea, which once again deteriorates the joy and happiness Jeremiah is to experience. As first, he's told to cut off the idea of having a family. Second, he is said to not join more in mournings or celebrations, we can see. As we can see, God will produce this punishment to the point that funerals and weddings will have lost their meaning, because the idea of the fruits of God's love will no longer be with these people, for they don't respect or take or actually understand the use of the fruits God's provided through his unconditional love, as the qualities that God expects in the show, they've continuously disobeyed them and they've continuously rebelled, and that is why God is saying here, do not. But of course, Jeremiah asks why, because God is about to because God at this point in the book, we can see, he declares clearly that he is he who has been so patient through their constant rebellions, we can see. He finally declares, we can see, he's stepping back because of their continuous rebellion, we can see. As God clearly made the point that he is weary of mercy in last week's video, where he said he's weary of providing that mercy no longer. And in this chapter, he's clearly stating, I am stepping back. God has clearly had enough, we can see, from their constant actions, and he's already planned out the punishment, and he's giving Jeremiah a solution of how to escape from this punishment due to the loyalty he has provided, we can see. And then we can see, though, when we all hear this, we think as natural people, we ask, why has God done this? And God answers clearly to Jeremiah as he asks. He reminds them that their fathers worshipped false gods, and now they're doing even worse than what their fathers had done, as they're following their own sinful desires and rejecting his law, we can see. And we can see it's not that like God didn't give them any chances. We've spoken about this many times. In these 15 chapters, we can think of over so many chances that God provided these people, the mercy he provided them. We can see that they refused to listen, we can see. And now God's judgment has come to place where he will send them into captivity of a foreign land. As these people continuously rejected the unconditional love God was trying to provide them, as that is God's true idea of bringing people to his word. It is to provide them the unconditional love. But people of this world are so obsessed with their own earthly love they decide to provide to others and what expect from us. They don't see the unconditional love they're constantly being given by the Lord. We can see as it's God's love that is the overall subset of qualities, of fruitful qualities that you gain, and it's those qualities that are allowing you to act faithful and beautifully. And yet people of today and people in the period of Jeremiah refused to accept God's unconditional love and acted so hastily with the opportunity and disregarded God's love so easily without understanding how pure and disregarding the purest form of love that is provided to you to lead your beautiful life. Yet you refuse to do it, but expect and want earthly love, for because your mind is so deceived, ultimately, we can see. And that is why God, in this situation, I shall say, is putting them in captivity of a foreign land. But God's unconditional love will never cease, of course, because God has his plan and God will fulfill his plan. So despite all of this judgment, we can see God speaks words of hope to Jeremiah still, as he promises that just as once he brought his people back out of Egypt, we can see he will bring these people once again from the land of the north, from their exile, we can see. And overall, what can we say? It shows the beautiful unconditional goal God has for these people, as the discipline that God is trying to provide. We can see overall it is always to try to restore the relationship and provide that continuous unconditional love to the people. But all God asks for is that continuous love back to a certain degree, not even to that purest form, but a certain amount of love to show that you understand, you're grateful for what God's providing you every day of your life, we can see. And then we can see God once again continues about how he is going to deal to ensure that he doesn't have to feel hurt from their constant actions, we can see. God says he will send fishers and hunters, but not literal ones, but uses these fishers and hunters to suggest a picture to Jeremiah about how he will find out about every hidden sin and how he will kill each one, and nothing, he says, will be hidden from his eyes, as he will completely quench the people from this idea of worshipping lands with idols, of these lands, I should say, with idols, and will completely destroy them all, completely, because these are things that provokes his anger. And now, as a consequence, he's going to ensure that they don't tempt his people once more, and that's why he's acting in this violent way, we could say, to ensure his people don't fall once again. So then what can we overall learn from Jeremiah 16th chapter? Well, overall, it reminds us that God is holy, and we cannot overlook sin forever, and we cannot be like, we can change, because that change has to happen now to ensure that you can live, because that life you live is very important, because God is the one that is fueling your life, and you're the one who has to understand that. And without understanding that, your judgment will be soon to come. But it also shows not only that, but the idea of God's idea of destruction. God is using the destruction, we can see, overall as a quality of his discipline to correct his people, we can see. Even in judgment, there is mercy overall, God's beautiful quality, we can see. Even in exile, we can see there is a promise of return. There is that idea of unconditional love. constantly through God's actions. And ultimately, God's plan is not just for Israel, like I said, but for the whole world, that all the people would come to know him and join him in his plan, we can see. So this is why we must learn from Judah's mistakes and not repeat them, so that we are not in the same boat of punishment to learn to be corrected, but rather be in the position of understanding the love God provides us and doing our best to show our love to him as well, because that's all God asked for, we can see. Because God, all he asks for is for these people to turn away from these idols, to turn from these physical and spiritual idols, I should say, once again, that they believe in, and walk in the obedience of the Lord. And like Jeremiah, be willing to stand firmly in faith, even if the message is hard, because overall, trusting God will always prevail. And that is the truth. So that's all for this week's video, and I will see you in next week's video. Bye.